Hi, everyone, and welcome back to that UFO podcast. My name is Andy, and joining me once again today, I have a journalist, researcher, filmmaker, and director of several documentaries and series, including his latest UFO Revolution, and of course, co host of the hugely successful Weaponized podcast with George Knapp. Welcome back, Jeremy Corbell. Jeremy, how are we?
Great, man. Thanks, Andy. Thanks for having me on. It's really cool to kind of get with you again. I like the way that you ask questions from some of your audience. So good to be here.
Yeah, there was a lot of them, I can assure you. Not enough to get through in one night for me, but I've picked out a selection of some of the better ones and best ones that I think we can get across here. And Jeremy, what a hell of a year 2024 was. Um, God, you were last on kind of middle of last year. I think it was the hearings fallout before the big hearing at the end of the year, or it was 2023. Christ, it was something like that anyway. But yeah, we got those hearings last year at the end of the year around November. That's where I want to start off because again, you seem to get your front row seats at these things. You've obviously got your contacts, but one of the big talking points afterwards was the Immaculate Constellation document, and there was a furore surrounding that. Do you want to just remind listeners in your words, because you were so involved, what happened there?
Yeah. So first of all, it's not like that I got like contacts to be in Congress. It's in DC. I worked for many months on both of the hearings. The idea or the aim for me was always to try to get the voices of people who deserve or are worthy of an element of our trust, who say, hey, look, I was involved in this. I have some particular knowledge about this. Hopefully, we vet people to a degree where when we get them up to that level, where they're telling congressional members like what they experienced, saw, had accidental exposure to, or directly worked on, that we can bring it onto that kind of that stage of Congress where, sorry, let me silence my phone, where the American public can then decide what it is, how much value to attach to it. That's why for the second hearing, because remember, we didn't have hearings for 50 years. And I know for a lot of us who are kind of coming into this new, like the UFO thing, we're seeing so much information, it's almost schizophrenic. Like there's just so much information. It wasn't always like that. We held a congressional hearing in DC. There was a mock congressional hearing in 2013 called the Citizen Hearing on Disclosure. Had 40 witnesses over 7 days, 5 congressional members, 1 senator. They were former members. And we tried to replicate what this would look like. And then all of a sudden, we've got the first hearing in 50 years. It kind of shocked me too. So getting involved with that, what I have been trying to do is bring credible people with what would seem to be incredible claims, but have direct knowledge in some way, and connect them with members of Congress and Senate and try to get them to tell their story. Whistleblowers, like straight up whistleblowers. Now, we still need to decide the value of that information, even with Immaculate Constellation. At some point, the author of that needs to come forward and tell the American public what it is and how it is that he got exposed to this information. And that is coming. And that's exciting. Like I'm excited about it too. But understand, when you bring people forward behind closed doors and you have them meet with the House and Senate and staffers, that does so much for the American public's understanding, but there's a limit. When you bring them out forward under oath on television in a congressional hearing, then we need to contend with that information. We need to vet it. We need to contend with it. And you saw that with David Grush, and you saw the pushback from intelligence agencies with David Grush, where they went after his PTSD records and they were just leaked to some shill-ass journalist, to try to discredit him. That should tell you a lot too. So with this last hearing, just break it down for you really simple. People are they have, lied about kind of what my motivation was for getting the records straight in that hearing. And I understand that. They say that So I delivered the Immaculate Constellation documents to Congress. It was an over a 2-month process. It was a really distinct process. I was able to walk the whistleblower in a very unique way, to meet directly with members. And this is just like in a public sense. You know, the individual had testified prior behind closed doors, but this was to prep Congress for being able to accept, hey, there's a person behind this. You're not being fooled. Like, this is a government employee who has something to say that I think is valuable. So imagine for like a couple months, I'm really putting like canary in the coal mine, you know, kind of like testing out the process. When Congress says we can protect you, whistleblower, you know, we're testing that out to see if it's true. So I kind of give a lot of mad respect to the author of Immaculate Constellation for willing to spill some blood to see if this is going to work. But that process was going on for a couple months. And then if you kind of followed along with the docuseries, it showed you what happened in real time. And the night before, I gave them a much more condensed and authorized assessment of what occurred, which people kind of know now as the 11 pages of Immaculate Constellation. But even to that last moment, because I felt the pressures of a sort of theatrical shaping of the UAP narrative, I waited to that last morning to have one copy that had an identifying mark, so that when it was copied and put on congressional record, it is absolute, it is authorized, it is correct and accurate information. So I had like a huge shock and surprise when they misrepresented that 2.5-month process of getting something onto congressional record to represent a whistleblower. And they just straight lied. You know, Nancy Mace lied. I mean, she knew, because I brought in the whistleblower, you know, months before. So it was just very bizarre to me. I still don't know exactly what to make of it, other than there's a control system, you know, in place for how they want to present information. And it was a lie. So I just called it out. I said that was a lie right there, sitting there by the dais, called it out. And there were a bunch of people there, witnesses. So people have said that that's my ego, like someone else turned in my homework. Okay. I don't, maybe they weren't listening. People then said that it was confusion. There was no confusion, none. And then the new lie is that, and I've been getting calls about this, we were just trying to protect you and the whistleblower. Protect me from what? I don't need protection. I just brought a whistleblower in, gave you the documents, made sure you had time to vet them so you could put them on congressional record. Why lie? So it was just so bizarre to me. Like, I still don't know why. Like, I still don't. But I think when we're asking for transparency on the UFO issue, and we are putting our trust in people that are supposed to represent us in Congress, we should know the ones that are shooting us straight. And Rep.Luna, so far, everybody has shot straight. So that's good, because now we know that those are the people that aren't going to twist things. Can't say much for other people, but for them, yeah, they told you it straight on your podcast. That was pretty cool. The next day after the hearing, you happen to have Burchett. I remember I was on a plane. I was like, dude, Andy, you should probably ask some questions, man. You know, there's some fuckery going on. And you did. You asked Rep. Burchett the day after the hearing who delivered the Immaculate Constellation report, because there's a whole process to it. And he told you. And then your question about why it was misrepresented. Man, his answer was interesting, because he is stuck. You know, he's stuck. There's somebody chairing it, and you don't want to blow everybody up. But he was as baffled as us about why they were shaping your perception behind this screen, the public perception of how that all went down. It's like they forgot there were cameras on for like 2.5 months following this shit. So I don't know. It was weird. You tell me what you think maybe is more important than what I think. But just to be clear, I am noticing that there is a shaping of the emerging UAP narrative, that they're trying to get you to trust people who are not worthy of your trust. So I have to ask why. My conclusion is that there are more people coming forward. And they want to, and when I say they, I mean the people that are influenced in Congress from forces and individuals and corporations and finances outside of Congress. They're influenced to show you that they are the ones that you should come to. And playing the whistleblower game is dangerous. You know, people's lives, their whole economics, you know, they have children, they have medical insurance, they have clearances. So putting any of those people who want to come forward into a position where you're telling them to trust certain people who are not trustworthy is highly dangerous in my business, where I come from. And if people don't really understand that yet, that's okay. You know, I hope whistleblowers that come forward understand that.
Transparency, I think, is the key word you use there. And regardless what people think or how things were presented, in that setting particularly, it's one thing being on a podcast or a documentary or a blog or an article or whatever it might be, but in a congressional setting or any political setting, live on TV, I don't think anyone should be choosing what gets presented and what doesn't get presented. So that's what it boils down to me, regardless who presented it. I suppose I had a little bit of confusion around Schellenberger's place, because I think, and we might go a bit all over here. You touched on it with George on the Weaponized latest podcast. It was a bit of a Q&A, which was cool to see that different format. This hearing felt different.
Yeah.
The people at it felt different. They didn't seem together. There were some good folks there asking some genuine questions. Some I expected to, some less so. Others, I don't know what they were doing there altogether, asking questions about pigeons and spy cameras and stuff like that. But yeah, it just seemed a little bit off. And I even had the opinion, was that meant to be the original 4 witnesses? Because it felt like Schellenberger was almost a placeholder. I actually, and I don't even know if this is how the US system would work. It almost felt like he was a placeholder, and I sort of expected on the day that his seat would be taken by someone else that would be a bit of a surprise witness. That never happened. So his place there is, especially in the aftermath, seems odd. And I don't know if you can kind of follow up on that.
Yeah, I mean, I can just tell you the facts and what I experienced. It was very odd because George and I were being pressured, like, okay, so they did want us to testify for a long time, or they were at least telling us they did. What are you going to provide, right? We're not going to have anybody up that doesn't provide anything. So what do you got to provide? And there were a number of conversations about what we would provide. And we didn't ask to testify. This was brought to us, right? But it felt more like an intelligence gathering operation more than anything. I'll tell you a fact. The moment that I submitted, outside of a few trusted congressional members, the entire Immaculate Constellation report that was put together by a whistleblower, I got dead silence from accountability and oversight. I even called my lawyer, who's a federal lawyer, and I'm like, this is really bizarre. Like, I just gave them the goods and I'm not hearing anything. Like, all of a sudden there's just radio silence. And like, yeah, this is really weird. It was within 7 days, they made some accusations to me over email, and I've kept all the receipts. And I'm like, no, that's incorrect. I brought the whistleblower in. This is at least legitimate information as far as a government employee authored this. They have something to say. They want protections of being under oath and coming out. Maybe not this time. Maybe we'll do it for another hearing if you want firsthand whistleblowers. But what exactly do you want? The second I submitted that information, there was a game that was played. It was a shuffle. They brought in Schellenberger. Okay, cool. I thought maybe that is appropriate. You know, he broke the story, wrote about it. I mean, I had been, obviously, if you watch the show, been walking in the whistleblower prior to that. But you remember, I was excited when there was another journalist that like came forward independently. I had never talked to the guy. I was pumped. I was like, finally, there's some good journalists that we can trust that are on this case too. I mean, I knew he had been informed to some degree, but it was just cool to see it in print. But it was right after that moment that the whole thing got shuffled, that you didn't have the same people that were being asked prior to represent other people, if not, whistleblowers come in themselves. It came together really quick, hard and fast, right at that last moment. So I would agree with you. I'm just telling you the facts, which is as soon as I delivered the contents, they went and hand selected somebody to speak on that, which is fine, but it did show me manipulation, and it did show me lies, and it did show me that I couldn't necessarily trust accountability and oversight. And that's just the facts. I can't. There was so much manipulation when we got closer. They also, just so you know, and the public knows, they also wanted to know what George and I would be reporting on for the next year, if we have obtained and we were going to release anything. Now, as journalists, that's not something that you don't show that card, you don't show that hand. You do right before, you give a heads up to the Pentagon, you let them know if you've obtained something. It felt sinister and it felt orchestrated. And when I saw the way that they were manipulating reality, I mean, look, they fabricated congressional record. This was kind of like a gift to me and George. I'm going to be really clear. They fabricated congressional record. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, it's the 12 pages, that whole fiasco. I was asked to write an introduction into the whistleblower and why the whistleblower is not going to be there that day, and also what it was to contextualize that 11 pages. I was asked to do that. So I did that. When Nancy Mace held up that thing, she says, here are the 12 pages. My question on Twitter was, well, where are the 12 pages? You only uploaded 11. And right after that, somebody put on congressional record a blank 12th page. That should be obvious to people. If they're invested in keeping a very simple clerical error, a very simple lie to you, that it wasn't a process I went through with accountability and oversight and with congressional members to get that onto congressional record, then why would they make up this 12th page? I mean, you're literally taking a blank page and fabricating it for congressional record to try to eliminate the idea that my entire packet submission to them was 12 pages. Why would you do that? Why would you go to that extent to fabricate congressional record? I mean, Andy, you tell me. Am I being clear that happened? Because it did.
No, 100% that did happen. One question I've got, and you won't tell me who the whistleblower is or the writer of the document, the author of the document is. All we know is it's a he, because you and George and others have said so enough. Is that whistleblower public in any way already? No. So they are someone that we don't know about. When they come out, we will all go, we don't know who that is.
100% correct. Yep.
Okay.
And look, this is a process when dealing with whistleblowers. There are others that have come to me and George for many years. We've gone through a vetting process. We've gotten to know them. This is not just one individual. There are others that are ready now when they're seeing the way things are being mishandled. The second they come forward, they blow up their careers. No longer will they be in government. No longer are they going to have their clearances, which is, by the way, that's livelihood. That's family, right? That's medical insurance. People are going to take that leap. They're gonna, they're just at the point where it's just got to happen. And these are not people yet. These will be new voices, and they need to speak for themselves. George and I are reporting on it, and I've been a conduit to some degree to get people in, to get them vetted within Senate and the House. But they have to stand on their own. If they want to make that leap, they're going to have to do that on their own. And yeah, it's happening as far as I can tell.
Good place to bring in a question from one of the listeners here, because a listener on Patreon, Dan, asked, how did the incorrect attribution to Schellenberger, how has that affected the whistleblower's confidence and safety?
I mean, I guess it depends who you ask. It's a very subtle thing. To me, it completely destroyed my faith in some of the working group within Congress that is trying to look. We're asking for transparency, and then you overtly lie and fabricate congressional record. Maybe even unknown reasons to me. Like I don't fully grasp it yet. So for me, it's put a pause on me walking, which I've done a ton, not not publicly like you've seen, where I walk one whistleblower in and I tell that whole story. I've done that a ton. I have sent people in or brought people in to give their testimony behind closed doors a ton. That's something that I was fighting for, was to have these voices heard. So for me, it's created a real separation of like, wait, what are they doing? Like, can I trust this? Can people's identities be held private when I do walk them into those scenarios? Or are they just collecting information like Arrow seems to be doing in the past? Is an absolute counterintelligence bullshit program like Project Blue Book. I call it Project Blue Box because even the guy that runs it now says he can't part his hair without authority. So it's kind of like people are imprisoned in this legacy architecture system. Can I trust bringing whistleblowers in? And there's a lot of different methods to do that I've utilized. So for me, it has put pause on, can I really protect the identities of people where they're not threatened, where they don't receive pushback and kind of retribution against them coming forward? The answer for me is no. I can't do that the same way anymore. Now, for the whistleblowers themselves, they're all tracking it. Like all of them that I know who are thinking about putting their head above the parapet, they are deeply tracking that there is a disconnect between reality and what has happened at that last hearing. And I think there's some pause, and I think it's put them in a little bit of a mode where they realize there's an urgency to come forward and to do so like full throttle, because if things can be manipulated on a small level, they can be manipulated on a bigger level. So that's to the best of my ability to answer that. I think you have to hear from some of the people coming forward. I do think that the Immaculate Constellation author went to Schellenberger because he was a respected journalist that has fought for transparency in government. That's what makes this so ironic, that the guy would just sit there and, take it on, not take it on the chin, but would just sit there and not correct an error. It was really bizarre. So I don't know. I think the reason why you first go to people is because you think they're going to be honest, have integrity, be helpful, and support you. And they've got a track history of doing that. And then I think there are some surprises sometimes when you do shit like this.
If you can separate the whole circus and situation around the document and what happened, what were your thoughts on just the hearing's content itself?
I thought they were pretty good. And let me give you a little background on why I thought they were pretty good. What people might not have picked up, and I've said it a bunch, is that there was resistance to having Lou Elizondo testify. I fought really hard for that. You see me in my show, officially being able to ask Lou Elizondo, because he's always said he would testify. And that's what everybody wanted, was Lou Elizondo to testify under oath. And the reason we wanted that, and the public wanted that, is because it's different, like going on a TV show or a podcast and like being under oath and being grilled by Congress. So we all wanted this, like I wanted people to trust Lou if Lou is trustworthy. And I have found Lou to be trustworthy. He's told me how it is, and over time, it's how it is. I don't have reason to think that Lou is pulling something on the American public, but the way to test that is to have someone like Lou testify under oath. So I fought really hard to make sure that he had the opportunity if he really wanted to. And sure enough, he really wanted to. I mean, he said to me, brother, I've been ready to do this from the beginning. That takes some balls, because there's going to be a lot of scrutiny and people twisting your words. So no matter what you think of Lou, I think Lou's a great guy. I think he's telling you how it is at this time. And I think he'll continue doing that. I wanted him under oath because I thought the American public deserved to have that. And it was a heavy lift. And it shouldn't have been. At one point, when I'm working with accountability and oversight, I was like, you understand, you are doing a disservice. I said this verbatim. I said, you understand, you're doing a disservice to the American public if you don't have at least one person who is factually known to have been involved with the UFO topic in government. I have given you people to give subpoenas to. I've told you who would come forward willingly, who wouldn't. And you're not 100% going to have Lou testify? I'm like, that's insane. That's totally insane. In fact, it's a disservice to the American public if you don't do that. And I think they were a little bit threatened by that, to be honest. I mean, that was one of the words that was used against me. That was like a threat. I'm like, it's not a threat. This is like, you're either doing it or you're not. You're telling us that you're going to bring this to the American public, then fucking do it. And luckily we had Lou. So now the American public can dissect what he said, can question him on it, and know he was under oath. And I think that was a huge win. So I think on that level for the hearing, that was great. I actually think the guy from NASA, Mike, was a great witness too. I've had more time to talk with him and interview with him. And he was involved with Bigelow Aerospace back in the day, not the ranch and all that stuff, but the actual aerospace company that put up inflatables that attached to the International Space Station. And this guy knows his shit. So I thought it was pretty cool to have him testify from his position, kind of representing NASA. I also, to a high degree, I think the panel was well organized. What I would have liked is to have had firsthand whistleblowers.
Yeah.
The problem is when I tried to supply that, there was a lot of resistance. And I don't know why. I don't know why. You come up with your own reasons why. But I offered them somebody they could subpoena who would be would show up to testify firsthand. And that subpoena never came. So my question is, did you really want them? Did you just want another hearing later where you got a bunch of firsthands? Great, let's have it. But it just felt controlled.
I felt the content, and I said this at the time, was a little bit lacking. I think Lou had to testify because that's something that, for years now, it had to happen eventually.
Yeah.
Tim Gallaudet, wonderful position, but seems to be limited in terms of what he can provide outside of one base incident he was a part of almost indirectly. And that's not to take away from what he can provide going forward and contribute, given his knowledge and his rank. Mike Gold, I think, in theory, sounded great. And then what we got from Mike wasn't maybe necessarily what I hoped for. I think that could have partly been down to a lot of the questions put to him and who they were put from. And then, like I say, Michael Schellenberger, again, highly respected journalist, you could have sat a cardboard cutout there, and you would have probably got similar and just attached a document to them because he's representing someone else's story,
Right.
So I don't know if part of that is just the impact that the Grush hearing had and the kind of bombshells and the snippets we got from that. And almost as if the hearings happened the other way round, would I have felt this one had more impact than that? I don't know. But I think I was hoping for more whistleblowers. And it reminds me a little bit, Jeremy, of years ago. I used to follow WWF, WWE quite religiously. And as a youngster, I paid for a meet and greet. And I was hoping to get Triple H, Chris Jericho, Kevin Nash, the big guys at the time. And in walked Val Venus, Jacqueline, Tajiri, and the coach. Now, any wrestling fans would know exactly who I'm talking about. And it's no disrespect to them. They are superstars. But what you hoped for and what you got ended up being two different things. And I remember the guy behind me had a wrestling title belt that he was going to get signed. And he just quietly put it back in the bag because he was like, I don't want these people to sign it, right? And again, that's not a disrespect on what happened. It was more of what we hoped we were going to get and what we got. Yeah. I was also disappointed with a lot of the representatives and what they asked. And I think that came across when I spoke to Representative Burchett the next day. He was deflated and he almost seemed like he'd had the wind taken out of him with the whole thing. Clearly things he wanted to say but couldn't. And he was very honest to the point of saying that he doesn't have the influence and power that other ranking members maybe in Congress do, and the financial backing behind those individuals who I imagine one day have delusions of presidency potentially, and they're planning 5 steps ahead. So that was really honest of him. And I wonder, does that mean is Congress even the way to go with this now to get progress? Is that something someone like yourself is now looking, going, I've put all this work in, I've knocked on all these doors, literally knocked on the doors,
Yeah.
and this is where we are?
Yes. You're reading the room correctly. You know, you got that interview with the Representative Burchett, and if people go back and watch that, it was featured in my series because it was happening in real time, and the producers were like, "Holy shit, he just said the quiet part out loud," you know, which is that there is influence outside of Congress that is somehow orchestrating the emerging UAP narrative, shaping it. And Representative Burchett was tongue-tied. You could tell. I was amazed how far he went. I feel like I don't have to say it. People need to pay attention for themselves. But that is, to my best assessment, what you're seeing is outside influence in Congress realizing they can't take back that Grush testified, which was a sneak attack. They can't take it back, that UAP, UFOs are real, that they're made by somebody else, is what it appears, wherever they're from. And now they're trying to shape the narrative to spoon feed the way that they want. And there's got to be gain. And you got to think about that. What would be the gain of propping up like a puppet journalist next to, you know, a puppet congressperson who is, they literally said in the hearing that they were told not to ask certain questions. Representative Burchett on your show said that why you said, what was the confusion about this like super easy clerical error about the submission of a document from Whistleblower? And he brought it up that you got to raise a lot of money and you're beholden to financial powers outside of Congress, and that he'd hate to have that job, that in fact he thinks he'll never have that job. So he was a little deflated. With that said, we can't throw the baby out with the bathwater. There is a place for Congress. There is a place for helping whistleblowers to come forward through accountability and oversight. The organization itself is a good idea. The individuals, the staffers, the people that really run the inside, I was told not to trust them. In fact, I'll tell you something here. I was going to bring a firsthand whistleblower in to meet with accountability and oversight prior to the hearing for vetting so that they could be a potential witness. And I was warned by certain members not to, meaning they're like, you can't trust everybody within that organization. And that freaked me out. That freaked me out a little bit, because accountability and oversight, they're supposed to be accountable and have oversight, right? And hold other people accountable. And I'm being told not to fully trust them. Look, I guess it's politics. Maybe I'm naive, you know, but there is corruption in politics. So where does that leave us? Everybody like you and me that want to know the truth about this, where does it leave us? I think Congress should keep moving forward. And I think we should be have a strict eye on how it is they present information. We should get the inside story every time that there's a new hearing, whether I'm involved or not. Like, I'll support it. I'll support it if they fucking tell the truth. And if they don't, we have to call them out for it. But I really think that journalism is our path forward. I think citizen journalism, and I think just journalism in general, that is our path forward. You are now inundated, bombarded with whistleblowers, right? People coming forward saying, I was a part of crash retrieval. And then they tell you this whole other part of the UFO story that they're, you know, looking through psionics to pull in craft and all that. Okay, cool. Show us. Like, that's really cool. We should hear you out. But let's get back to that first part. So you say you're part of a crash retrieval program. David Grush said that we do that, and now you're saying you're part of it. I think a lot of attention should be put on that. We should try to unravel the physical, tangible, hardcore roles that people had in government, either keeping the UFO secret or just participating in recoveries. Like, we should ask more questions about that and then move into the other experiences. That's my personal opinion. Like, we need ground truth on those elements.
No, I can appreciate that. And just before we head into some listener questions, like I say, I'm going to go over a few different areas that we've touched on in a bit more detail within that. But we've seen a fragmentation in, I think, well, I've got to say, I think I've seen a fragmentation in the conversation and the way forward, it seemed a few years ago, was all behind maybe one organization and an individual. I think it seemed simple. Not everyone, but most folks were like, Louis Elizondo's came out. You've got two of the stars. This is pushing things forward. And he seems like the guy. And since then, it seems like now we've gone from a place of having kind of one focal point to having lots of little focal points. And we've got the Sol Foundation, we've got Jeremy and George, we've got Lou, we've got Congressional Caucus trying to do something. You've got whistleblowers now coming out through other journalists like Ross Coulthart. It just seems more fragmented and maybe less connected than it was at one point. But I don't know, is that necessarily a bad thing? And I want your take on that.
I don't think it's a bad thing. I think we need, like, I can't handle every case. Like, I pass off cases more often than George and I tackle them, right? Other people are more equipped in different ways to get out some of the information. I think it's like, maybe it's a bad term someone said, but divide and conquer, the idea that we're going to utilize different realms of journalism and different individuals to dig into different stories. I think that is so important. If one set of journalists is getting every story, we can't trust that. We need to make sure that whistleblowers and people who are coming forward with this information, whether it be visual data or, which is, George and I have really focused on that, but whether it be visual data or individuals, I think there's a beauty to the divide and conquer aspect where you have people who are not directly associated digging into the same overall story. I know it can feel schizophrenic, to people, but the positive aspect of it is that you just get so many more minds on these cases. Now, look, if history shows us anything, there's gonna be disinformation. There's gonna be, and it's gonna get up there, right? Like, that's just part of it. If you remember back in your history of the UFO lore, Project Blue Book did a great job at that, is disinforming the American public and stigmatizing the UFO issue. But you also remember like the MJ-12 documents, which was legitimate information seeded with a bunch of nonsense. And I think that's by design. That is the way that you protect information and the way to trace information is that you seed good information with nonsense. So we're going to see that. Like, don't have any illusion that everything coming your way is going to be solid gold. That's going to be up to the public to try to decipher. And journalists will try, as they report, to make sure the nonsense gets tucked away, like, hands off, let that go. But I think what feels now to be a dispersed attempt to come to terms with the expanse of the UAP issue, which is huge, I think that's going to coalesce into something a little bit clearer as people come forward who have worked in these programs. We know that Jay Stratton, who's been pretty quiet about it publicly, is not going on a bunch of shows and stuff. He came on mine and George's. That was pretty cool. But Dr. James Lakatsky as well, these people that were directly involved, I think you're going to hear more from them. And I think that's really good, because I think those are people with integrity. And I think they're going to tell you as much as they can without hurting national security. And I think that will fill in some voids.
We've got that Age of Disclosure documentary due to premiere at South by Southwest in March. So I'm guessing by the end of March or April, I would hope we see that available publicly. It's got a lot of big names in it. We hear often documentaries are coming and they'll move the needle. That will remain to be seen. And I think a lot of that can depend on distribution. You could make the greatest UFO documentary on earth, but if 20 people see it on Amazon Prime, in Botswana, then that's not going to move the needle in the US. So it needs distribution, it needs money, it needs marketing behind it. You'll know that with your documentaries, and getting on platforms like Netflix ASAP can be a big move as well. And I wonder, Jay Stratton made a comment within the trailer, and we mentioned before we started recording about sound bites. And Jay Stratton says, I'm going to have to paraphrase him, I have seen firsthand bodies and I've seen firsthand craft. He makes the big statement. My concern with sound bites was that there's a qualifier before that and the actual full piece. And he says something like, enough's enough. What we need going forward is people to say, I've seen firsthand craft and I've seen that. And it's just
Oh,
the way it's been cut. So I've been told that isn't the case from someone who has seen the documentary, or at least some of the documentary. What's your take on that? Because that one statement alone for me is a pretty big one for anyone to make, let alone a Jay Stratton, who more and more people say was and is the guy.
right. Yeah, no, very sharp of you, because I see when I use, like my last show, the way clips are taken out of context. When I was talking about the rumor that I heard of 2027 and how concerned I was. And look, it's the rumor, as you know, anybody who's followed this, it's like 2026, 2027, all the way up to 2036. I was calling out a rumor that I thought was dangerous because I know the origin of that rumor from my investigations, from my journalism. I was calling bullshit for people, saying, look, this doesn't have the legs that people think. But I was taken out of context, and then people are just playing these clips where it looks like I'm calling for the end of the world. So clips are not context. But I also understand that no matter how much you tell it like it is, if people want to twist it, they're going to twist it. So getting to that clip you're talking about, which is in the trailer of Age of Disclosure, I haven't seen the movie, so I don't know the whole thing, but I would have the same thoughts as you. Are we talking about bodies in cryogenic freezers at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base? Or are we talking about something you saw in your civilian capacity, not officially in the job? I don't know. Like, we'll have to see. I do know that Jay Stratton has seemed to be a straight shooter, and I appreciate that. So I'm not going to predispose from a clip that we're going to get like the full-on disclosure of what's going on, because even just somebody's account is never going to give that to you. But I do put trust in that. To date, somebody that has always been straight with me has been Jay Stratton and to George Knapp. And if that changes, we'll tell you, but that hasn't changed. So what is the anticipation for a statement like that in a film like this is coming out? Well, I think you got to watch the film. I think we all got to watch the film and judge it for ourselves. Does it move the needle? I'm sure it will. I mean, how cool is it? You get all these people talking on camera about UFOs. I don't even know if James Clapper, who's in the film, if he really says that much. But the fact he was willing to be filmed and go on a show about UFOs, that's a big deal to me. That already moves the needle. The trailer itself moves the needle because it brings a bunch of questions up to the front that would be smart enough to ask. So I hate it in the UFO world when we're so pessimistic about, well, that wasn't what I expected. I mean, I'm guilty of that too with the hearing, like wasn't exactly what I wanted, but it was a step forward. And I think we need to be patient. Some of us have been at this longer than others. Like George has been at this 40 years. And I think we have to be patient, and we have to be vigilant, and we need to call out bullshit, and we need to follow up. We need to follow up on the sound bites.
So let's get to some listener questions then, and then we can kind of riff off the back of those, Jeremy. Lots get sent in. So if you don't hear your question, it's probably been answered in the body of the interview, or someone else asked something similar, or I just never got to it because, email was clogged up. But let's, so to summarize, I think this is a good one to kick off from KR. Says, so what is the next move with Congress? Continue to work together for more hearings or work around them due to lack of trust?
Work with them. I think that's important. You never know who's going to be in power and in what capacity. Congress itself moving this forward has done a lot for knowledge and understanding on the UFO topic. So despite the fact that I saw shenanigans, and despite the fact that I had to endure some of that, which by the way, people should be more concerned about. This isn't about me. This is about us. It's about you. I don't know if that's clear to people yet, but I think over time it will be. But I think we need to utilize every piece of armament we have to shake the trees on this subject, I am willing to work with Congress. I am willing to work with accountability and oversight. I am just asking for no fuckery. I am asking for straight shooting. I am absolutely willing to continue to help because there are great people who want to know the truth, who are fighting for the truth. Again, Representative Burchett, Representative Luna, I do believe, and they have demonstrated to me that they're willing to push, even though it's not great for their personal lives in a lot of ways. They're willing to push for it. So with Congress, not without, just keep them accountable.
What disappointed me, and again, I spoke to Tim Burchett about this the day after the hearing, was I was surprised to hear they still hadn't had Grush in that skiff almost 18 months on from that original hearing. And I said at the time of the Grush hearing, I think, and I say this about a lot of stuff, the importance of it or the legacy of something will be what happens in the future, what comes of it, regardless of the statements and who makes them and the power of them. If nothing happens off the back of it, David Grush's coming forward is almost for nothing in a way. And I imagine that frustrates him. What is your take on Grush coming out in July 2023? And here we are. And as far as we know, he's still not been in those skiffs.
Right. So he should speak for himself. There has been some testimony given. So he has given, a number of hours of testimony in different formats. So I wouldn't claim that nothing has happened from it. But again, it's not my position to explain that publicly. I hope that he will explain what lengths that he's gone to convey the information and pushed to be able to convey it. But I do understand the basic premise of how they wanted him in the skiff. Again, if this UFO thing is real, then some of this stuff is highly sensitive and it should be dealt with in that way. So I can't give you more insight to that. It's just it's inappropriate for me to give more insight. I think people need to speak for themselves, but all is not lost. Like, David Grush has given plenty of testimony to work with. I am a little baffled why some of what he testified to wasn't followed up on.
Yeah.
It's a little baffling outside of Arrow. It's not baffling within Arrow. I have directly seen a cover up of whistleblower firsthand information and lies coming out of Arrow under the direction of Sean Kirkpatrick. I have not seen enough evidence to make an assessment from the new director. So I don't know. Everybody's just got to push and see where we go.
So Mike says, as George often says on Weaponized, the closer we get, the harder the pushback. Yeah. Do you think we're finally getting close? Or given the pushback, is catastrophic disclosure more inevitable?
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly what that term means, because what is catastrophic disclosure? Like it's your belief system. Has all the evidence been proven to you? What they're saying catastrophically, like meaning whistleblowers just come forward and show you photos of craft and bodies. Like, what is catastrophic disclosure? It's a very cool term and people throw it around, but like, what does it really mean? Like, we're all in this together, man. Like, we're going to get somewhere together. So the closer you get to the goodies, George does say this, and he's right, the more pushback you'll get. So I have experienced that. George has experienced that. There are a lot of people that don't want us to report on some of what we've obtained. And fuck it. We're going to do our best. We're going to do our best to do it within the guidelines of journalism and the law. And other people hopefully are going to do the same. Catastrophic disclosure, I don't even know what that is, man. I guess that's based on consensus reality. Disclosure is. And I think people need different things to get to that point.
I think it's very much open to interpretation. I've always had catastrophic disclosure, and I know others have as well, as disclosure without any control behind it, and that, for example, the government doesn't have any say in what's happening, how it's unfolding. Catastrophic disclosure, could that just be we get UFOs over New York, all of a sudden, mass sighting, bang, there they are, something like that, or at once so much kind of happens, whistleblowers, but then they open the gates at Area 51. And do you know what? I think a good question to follow up on then on that is from Rob. He says, Jeremy, it's a bit lively out there at the moment. I don't think Trump can be relied on to help the cause unless it helps him. Do you think he was ever in a position to help anyway? So what's your take on President Trump now in office? Things are a bit chaotic stateside. I'm watching more of the UK news at the minute to see what's going on stateside, and it just seems like one thing after another. So where does the UFO conversation fall in that?
Right. It's a very valid question because there's a lot of promises and a lot of optimism about transparency in government that I've noticed with the new administration. But remember, we had before, Bill Clinton trying to get this information forward through a guy named Webster Hubbell, had him go in and say, I want to know who killed JFK and what's up with the UFOs. And Webster Hubbell did try. And Bill Clinton even came out and said, it wouldn't have been the first time I was lied to as a president. And you see the comments by Barack Obama about the UFO thing. There definitely, sadly, appears to be a legacy architecture and a legacy control system in place to protect certain conceptual ideas, about UAP and the origins and what the purpose is and the intent and what we know about them. So I would never put my wholehearted trust and faith in the absolute transparency of this issue. Somebody in your question did say, unless it benefited the current president. I think that's probably an accurate assessment. That's a political way to look at it, that if it's helpful, like maybe it's helpful to know who killed JFK. Maybe that is helpful to a president. Fuck, if I was a president, I'd want to know who offed another president, right?
Yeah.
So maybe there's benefit to releasing some of that. Is there benefit to releasing the UFO information? I don't know. President Trump was briefed to some degree on it. I know some of the individuals involved with that. But when he answered about the New Jersey drones, it was a whitewash. It was absolutely ridiculous. It was the White House put out an absolutely ridiculous statement about what we were seeing and are seeing, not only over New Jersey and critical infrastructure, nuclear bases and military armaments overseas. Like, this has been happening a long time. And it was a nonsensical answer. So that gives you a taste of, if that's the way it's going for UFOs, it ain't going good.
Yeah. Imagine Steve said, can Jeremy speak to the donor alignment of people like Nancy Mace who are attempting to steal disclosure? Is it related to figures like Peter Thiel? Can he speak to any figures or groups who the UFO topic following public should be skeptical about related to this?
I think we should be highly aware that they said in Congress that certain questions were not to be asked. I think we should be highly aware of when Representative Burchett referenced financial interest in Congress. And I think we should be highly aware of the financial influences that are now tied to the UFO, UAP disclosure movement. I won't sit here and say that I fully understand it or that I have conclusions yet, but I am tracking it. And I think the question from your audience member is a very valuable question. And the reason I think it is because if you look at what the motivation would be financially tied to the UFO phenomenon, you can just look back in history and you can see that certain craft and materials have been allocated to certain defense contractors, and those materials have been exploited for derivative technologies. And one that is very popularly known is Lockheed Martin. And we know that because the head of the DIA UFO program, Dr. James Lakatsky, talked about a transfer from the vice president of Lockheed Martin that was supposed to go to OSAP, a DIA program, and it was shut down by the head of the CIA, two people within the CIA. So you have to wonder, what is the financial advantage to being able to obtain and hold and exploit these technologies? And there's huge financial advantage. So I think we should be very aware. Now, not that it's wholly bad. I mean, if we didn't make a lot of progress on these machines and this technology, we definitely should pull them out of places and get them better looked at. But you got to have motivation to want to position yourself for that, for material transfers of these technologies. And look, things are financially motivated, they are. So it's not wholly bad, but we should track it, because I believe that's where we're going to learn a lot, if we understand who's trying to pull the puppet strings on who gets these craft.
Yeah, I think George said as much again in the latest Weaponized about, it's billions and billions of dollars of taxpayers' money is going to these things. And actually, I was just speaking today to John Blitch, and I don't know which order the interviews are going to go out. And he talked about, he's got a book that's going to come out, and he's trying to put forward the case that there has to be elements of forgiveness to people in the government, people outside the government, potentially some of the NHI themselves. It goes into abductions. And he talks about even the idea that perhaps there's a case, I hope I get this right, that, when you hear about the military charges $3,000 for a toilet seat on board a certain aircraft, which is ridiculous, but they've potentially come out one day and say, for the good of the nation, to try and build up defences against certain aspects of what this may be or threats it could pose, we have had to find a way to fund that. And a way to do it was overcharging on this stuff. Now, that's one way to look at it. Maybe it was just a money-making scheme on behalf of contractors and folks. And, Jeremy, you're my mate. You make toilet seats. I'm going to give you this contract and put a number on that, that sheet of paper and invoice me. But that could make sense. I don't know, what's your take on that sort of thinking?
Yeah, that's a complex issue. I'm surprised he brought it up. It's like front loading, criminality. You're like, hey, by the way, we might have done this, and we should have some forgiveness. I don't think he's wholly wrong, but what he's talking about is the black budget. And early on in my days in investigating this UFO topic, like way before I ever said anything publicly, I actually went down to the Library of Congress, and I calculated for a friend the American black budget for that year. It was really bizarre. I went to DC, went to the Library of Congress, went through the budget line items, and they literally said on the sheets of paper, like, black budget. Like, this is stuff that like Congress doesn't even know about. So we're talking about laundering money. I mean, that's what we're doing. We're talking about laundering taxpayer money to utilize it in different ways. Now, of course, there's an argument for that. Like, if we were in the Cold War and we were in a race for nuclear armament, I think Americans would be like, I get it. That was an expensive toilet seat, but really glad you did it, because we were really under threat and people didn't really know how bad it was, right? So that would be the argument for okaying that black budget, right? But I brought that up with George a couple times, wanted to see his perspective. And he says, of course, there should be some reconciliation and there should be some, basic forgiveness. He goes, but to what degree? Because George is old school. He's seen it happen. We watched as certain people have been threatened and penalized for even just speaking to us, right? Like threatening emails from high up all the way down, like, don't talk to journalists, don't talk to these guys. So we've seen the reprisals that have been put on people. And George made a good point. He goes, yeah, that makes sense to a degree, but where do you draw the line? And he goes, what if somebody has killed somebody to hide this secret? We know for sure people have been killed to hide the nuclear secrets, and we just accept that. We're like, so I think, Andy, like, it's in the realm of morality now, right? It comes down to how bad's the crime. I can understand keeping certain funds secret so you can work on programs, and keeping certain UAP programs secret because of the weaponization potential. But at some point, we're done with that. And we just need to say it like it is. Representative government represents us. It's now time to come clean on the UFO thing. And I think we're close to that, closer than we've ever been before, that we're fed up with it. And hopefully that has impact.
Josh says, a few years ago, both Jeremy and George hinted that there were at least 4 UFO programs. Can Jeremy elaborate on that any further?
I can't elaborate that any further. And I think that's kind of diminishing the truth, just by focusing on that one statement. There are many UFO programs. I became aware of a certain number of them early on, but there are kind of factions of groups. Think about it this way. Like if you had a craft, and in that craft was writing and was biologics and that kind of thing, then you would have whole teams of people. You would have linguistics people, you'd have just technology-based people, power and propulsion people, people that dealt with biology, you'd have anthropologists. So you could put all of that under one name. So definitely there's a pyramid here going on with UFO programs. For example, we also learned about Immaculate Constellation. We haven't had that conversation yet, but what was that program, or what is that program now under a different name?
Yeah.
And that program was an acquisition program where you would take and siphon off data, visual data of our exploitation, not ours, other nations' exploitation of those technologies, as well as just what they call NHI technologies, demonstrating things like instantaneous motion, like videos of this. You would pull them off of servers and collate them into a study group. That would be a pretty big project, right? So with the UFO programs, and why I brought that up, years before, is because I became aware of a certain number that were kind of housed other programs. But it's a pyramid, it's a trickle down. There are numerous UFO related programs based upon what it is that we are analyzing. And you could come up with any arbitrary number, but there are some core programs for sure.
A personal highlight for me was when I spoke to George, I think back in December, I spoke to George about his new series. And I asked him a question about, we were talking about alien abductions. And I asked him, had he ever come across any research or programs where aspects of the government, the legacy programs, whatever they may be, had found a way to bring on abductions and trigger them themselves? And is that something you've come across or can talk on?
I like to stay within what I know to be the case. I do believe that George has been exposed to significant amounts of information related to UFO programs that, as a journalist, not many people have been. And I think he is perfectly positioned to talk about that. All I can say is I've been exposed to some information, and it appears that there's something more to the abduction phenomenon than I first thought. I would study it if I was the government. I would study the fuck out of that.
That was
I'm not in a position. So sorry, let me back up.
No, it's okay.
I'm not in a position to offer more information on that I can stand behind. But like a lot of people, I might expect there to be more information on that.
That was a big topic of conversation again with John Blitch today around the abduction program, and he very much comes down on the reason for the secrecy isn't the lights in the sky, isn't the beings in the craft, because he's like, what good reason could you have for that? He believes it would have to be the abduction phenomenon, and that these craft and entities, some of them, can take you, your children, whoever they want at will, do what they want and put them back. And whether there are agreements or not in place with said governments or factions, there's nothing they can do to protect you against that.
That would suck. I have been exposed to some reporting on military observed like implants and stuff like that have been studied. Now, my ability to put a value on that is not as good as maybe George Knapp or people that actually ran some of these programs that looked at this stuff. So I hope they talk for themselves. I wonder if people like Dr. Colin Kelleher would know more about that. Somebody you've had on the show before, I believe.
Yeah.
I don't know. I just I am very careful about going into those realms because there seems like a fear aspect to it. Look, it would suck if the dirty, deep secret, and the reason why a lot of these legacy program people, when I push all the way up to the edge and I say, what is so scary? What is so dangerous for us that you can't say anymore, that you just stop right there? And, when they're like, don't kick a sleeping dog, don't wake a sleeping dog, it makes you feel like, so what is so dangerous? What is so scary? I would guess that the abduction phenomenon if it is what it appears to us to be, that is a terrible, terrible, frightening thing for human beings to have to contend with, that there are abductions. And I would suppose there are abductions. I would suppose that does happen, because that has always followed the UFO topic. I mean, since the beginning of time of people reporting this, the abduction phenomenon goes way back. But again, it's so out there for me because I don't
Yeah.
have tangible evidence or information I can convey. I can tell you I've heard everything, man. I'll be honest with, or I'll be transparent with that, which is that I've heard it all, man. Now, do I put stock into that? I just don't have enough information.
Yeah, I think it's one of those, it's so speculative, and I'm always fascinated to hear people's testimony, and it ranges from these wonderful, almost heavenly-like experiences to plumbing the depths of hell, what some people go through in these abductions. And I almost wonder, is there an element, again, just speculation, and I'll take your comment on it,
Okay.
if these beings are doing these abductions almost quietly and not too, too brashly, because there's a lack of knowledge or belief in NHI in general? And is there a danger that, and I'm trying to, I suppose, think of the government's point of view here, or whoever runs these programs. Imagine it was the case that, well, if everyone finds out and the human population now know that NHI exists and we are here, then we don't have to hide anymore. And literally en masse, we will come and do this as we please. And we will pluck people out their beds or their jobs, their desks in the middle of the day, because But while people don't know, and while it's blissful ignorance, they go about it quietly.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I wouldn't pre-warn or want people to be fully aware. If I was a species that was like bagging and tagging, like antelope or something in a valley, I wouldn't go like whisper to the antelope and let them know everything that's going on. So I don't know, but what I think we should highlight is that as we learn more about the reality of UFOs, like the machines themselves, we'll start asking about operators or pilots of those
Mm.
machines. Then we'll start asking about agenda. Then we'll start asking about all the things in UFO lore that have collided with sightings. And one that is, we are incapable of getting around, if you listen to people, is the abduction phenomenon.
Something I've recently started thinking about, and I'll really have to try and, qualify it and write it down, because I'm not eloquent enough. I've said that before, to kind of spitball these things, but is quantity of craft. And I don't mean, Bob Lazar says we have recovered 9 in a hangar. I mean, how many of these active craft are there? Because if they can manipulate space, time, whatever, travel at incredible speeds, you could essentially have a handful of craft operating at any one time in the globe, in the single digits, but people think there's thousands. There could be thousands of sightings of the same 5 craft. So is it that we have loads of these things visiting, or actually it's quite a small number, but that's a very hard one to pin down?
It is. I would suggest that at any given time, we have enough activity going on consecutively, like just the 2019 events that George and I talked about. You had 14 on radar at one time. There were a lot more.
Mm.
I don't think that it's a matter of very few craft. I think that there are a lot of craft a lot of the time. That's at least what the evidence shows me. I had a very dramatic friend back in the day before he died. His name was John Lear, the godfather of conspiracy, and
Yeah.
kind of filmed with him for many years. And like, he had wild ideas. I'm not sitting here saying what he told you was true, but some of what he discovered was true. He had this very dramatic thing he'd say to me, and he'd be like, "Jeremy, if you could see at any given time all the craft in our sky, the sky would be black." His standpoint was, we have so much happening all the time, and that they can cloak that we're not seeing them. My question to that is, look, it takes us like one tiny little satellite to map the entire surface of the moon in a week, right? That the number of craft and the varied looks of these craft that are reported, it just doesn't add up. There's something else going on to have these many shapes and this much activity. So I don't know what the purpose would be to having so many different craft when we can go map the moon with a single orbiter in a very short amount of time. So I don't know the answer to it. I would suspect, though, that there has been both an increase of frequency and there has been better imaging technology to pick these things up. Maybe it's been the case. There's always been so much craft and we're just seeing them more. But I think there's two things going on at one time. And why? I don't know. I don't know. Wish I did.
Before we talk about whistleblowers again, because a lot of the questions focused on that situation, you did mention the whole 2027 craft heading toward Earth thing, and you mentioned clips can be taken out of context. I got a
Yeah.
lot of questions about that clip. A lot of them were, who's coming up with this? Is there a ship heading towards us? You know, etc. Can you just clear up what it was you said, the context behind it, so people are clear,
Sure.
and we can kind of go from there?
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity to do so. But I'm not sure it will clean anything up because people seem to want to portray what I said in their own way. I think if you watch it, you'll understand. I was, again, saying the quiet part out loud. I don't need to tell you anything about those dates. They're everywhere. Every UFO person has gotten texts or they have heard it or they've been told it. And I shouldn't have to clean anything up. What I was saying is that I have heard that repeatedly over and over, that I have rooted it down to its origin. And I know that there is a document from the 70s that gave that idea to people, and that it was not enough information, that I thought that from what I looked at, what I was exposed to, that is something that people are portraying as, oh, something's coming. Now, look, I could be wrong, but in my show, and what a thing to be wrong about. Wow. But in
Yeah.
my show, what I did was I said, hey, I am concerned about this. I am concerned you are all coming to me telling me you've been told about this, that this is something in the zeitgeist of the UFO public that I thought was very dangerous. I thought, we've all heard about, what is it, Project Blue Beam and all that stuff about a fake alien invasion. And so it was so on the pulse of what I've heard in our popular understanding of the UFO thing, and it was increasing, getting louder. I was calling it out, and I was saying, I don't trust it. I think it's bullshit. And I just wanted to say that so that people could hear my perspective on it. But that very quickly got turned into me saying, we're going to have a fake craft coming and all this stuff. And that's not what I was saying. I was saying, beware of people telling you that, beware of that general concept, that I think it's bullshit. Horseshit.
So do you think in general then, and thanks for clearing that up, that we're in a time with things being so full on, with so much information being thrown at us all constantly, we're going to get a lot of, is it disinformation? I think that's a lazy
Yes.
term sometimes, but we're going to get a lot of things thrown at us deliberately just to
Yeah.
muddy the water.
100%. That's what I've kind of tried to raise the alarm about, is that as you get flooded, George says something like flooding the zone, like it's some term for football or something. I don't watch football, but flooding the zone. The idea that we're getting so much information bombarded that people are going to take advantage of that. And you're going to have a lot of kind of false prophets with this stuff, right? People that take credit for things that they didn't do, as if they're influencing this. Look, the UFO thing, man, it brings in so many huge feelings about the nature of reality and about what's going on. I do believe that we need to be on guard for false and bad information coming forward. I certainly do. I get all the time seeded with stuff that people want to just use my mouth for, maybe to cut me down later and say he was wrong. Newsflash, I'm wrong all the time. Ask my wife, but I do try to vet information, and specifically people, in an absolutely intense and dogged way before I bring them forward. So I do my best.
A good place to ask you then about Luna has just tweeted that she's got a big announcement coming next week.
Yeah.
Folks in the UFO community have latched onto this and went, it's UFO related, it's UAP related. Someone did ask her, and Jared Moskowitz replied saying, you're warmish.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that to me doesn't reek of it's UFO UAP related, but
Yeah.
that could be something along, and a good place to bring up that whole FBI working group situation getting outed and people being sacked. It could
Yeah.
just be something around intelligence services. I'll stop waffling, but ask, have you heard much about this? And do you know if it is indeed UFO related?
Yeah. So what I'll say is that I can imagine that it's transparency related, but I don't know for sure. Of course, I've heard from people what they think's going on. People, but I decline to like just find out from her. I think that she should just speak for herself. So
Yeah.
what is it? I'm sure like everybody can wait a week. Like, what is it? It's probably just, about transparency. Great. It will apply to the UFO thing if it is. If there's some sort of executive order dealing with transparency with the intelligence agencies, that's a fucking win. So I'm assuming it's that. I don't directly know, and I don't feel like asking.
No, that's fine, and that's my kind of thoughts as well with it. That people have just looked at the statement and went, "Oh, must be UFO related,"
Oh, I get
and
it. Okay.
yeah,
Yeah.
and when there's a lot
Maybe. I
coming out,
mean, yeah. I think it will probably be transparency based. I'm not a fortune teller though. Just wait and see. Yeah.
yeah, and people will soon enough. Perhaps after this goes out, perhaps before it. Who knows?
Okay.
So on the whistleblower stuff, then this has been obviously the year of the whistleblower currently.
Mhm.
It was almost the end of last year if you had got the chance to get that whistleblower sat down in Congress. But like you say, it maybe wasn't for that hearing anyway. Perhaps it was for a next hearing, depending on how things play out. So, a lot of questions on whistleblowers. Casey asks, did Jeremy know about Jake Barber? And if so, why didn't you break his story first or mention his story previous to him coming out?
Yeah. I mean, so of course, I think in the small circles of journalism, I did hear about Jake Barber. I didn't, he didn't come to me with the information, and it was also something that, as I kind of saw it percolating, I knew it was in good hands. You can't do every story. Like, I think that would be very weird. It takes a lot of, so I wasn't given the opportunity to jump into that story. I think there are other people better suited for that story. And also, a lot of people, maybe people don't understand this. A lot of people come to me and George, a lot of
Mm,
people. And oftentimes, George and I are unable to do sufficient amount of background on somebody to be able to stand behind them. So people that are public now absolutely came to me and George early on. We didn't have enough to say we can get behind this. Like with David Grush, we could absolutely. We had about a year, and I mean, he came to my home. I talked to other people he worked with. We were able to vet that information to the point where I would sit behind him in Congress and fight to get him to testify, because I had sufficient time and experience to trust that information. So what I think the disconnect is people don't understand that a lot of the individuals that will come to us, we sometimes spend a year or so and then kind of hand off some of the information to other people. And other journalists do that with us too. You're better qualified to look into this. You have better sources. They're going to help you with that. And so I think that's kind of teamwork. That's like working together, even if you're not like working together on a case. So the Jake Barber story and account and what he did, from what I hear, it's on solid ground, but it was never something that I was given the opportunity to really dive into and assess for myself. But now I'm assessing it. Now I get to see it like you guys and find out.
yeah, it's not that you're all sat in a room yourself, George, Ross Coulthart, Michael Schellenberger, and whoever
No.
answers the phone first gets the story. That's just not how that's not how
No.
these things work,
And I
obviously.
think whistleblowers, also, there are certain people you can trust to a degree. So you might reach out for advice, not to break your story. Like, first thing I
Yeah.
tell people is, okay, cool. If you're looking to be on TV in a movie or for me to break your story, then go somewhere else. Like, I'd love to hear what you have to say, but that's not the starting point. The starting
Mhm.
point is, who are you? What do you have to say? Why are you calling? And then if I can say, hey, this journalist might be better positioned to unravel some of the stuff within your account, then absolutely we'll pass it over to other people. sometimes it just stops dead in the water because there's nothing anybody can ever do to verify their claims.
So on that, I'm sure you've seen the egg video from the
Yeah.
Jake Barber segment, 12-second clip. What was your
Yeah.
thoughts on that piece of footage?
Looks like an egg. My thought, I'm not a video analyst. I do know that crash retrievals are real. I do know that crash retrieval of unknown origin are real. I mean, I personally know that, like I have enough evidence from my work. And that I do know that there are multiple programs to retrieve what they believe are NHI, non-human intelligence made craft. So why wouldn't that be one? But that's as far as I got, right? I think what people need to now do is talk with the people that brought the story forward, talk with the people who directly brought the footage forward, and look for origin of that footage and try to understand it better. So yeah, I'm like you, like I'm with you on it. I don't have any special knowledge on that. I just hope we get to the bottom of that.
You're assuming I don't have special knowledge on it. I don't.
I am. Maybe you do. Yeah,
Sorry.
turn the
Full-
tables, Andy.
Yeah.
What's up?
Transparency, I don't. But is there an element of, with this emerging narrative and all these different points of attack, whatever you want to call it, that
Yeah.
people maybe have to reset expectations around what disclosure is and what it's going to look like? Because I think for a lot of people, there are elements to, if we just take the Barber story in isolation, it's one thing to have this guy come forward, incredible background, as you would expect, you know, the
Yeah.
CV's glittering, and he says, I was retrieving UFOs, essentially. You get a little bit of footage of something similar. We're not saying it was Jake who was part of that footage, it was a separate piece of footage. But then the story in the same breath evolves into psionics,
Yeah.
overcome with emotions, and like a feminine, godlike energy. And it just, it turns, and a lot of folks can't get their heads around that yet. But do we maybe just have to take a step back? And do you feel you have to do that yourself, even with what you know, and go, maybe this is genuine? How do you work with that?
Yeah. Yeah, I don't dismiss it outright. I don't go around and, do how can you do a deep investigation on a part of that, right? Like that's up to the people telling you. I know that people have validated Jake Barber's background. I have no reason to doubt that he did crash retrievals. I think we should pay attention to what he has to say. And even if it's outside of our scope of comfort, I think we should pay attention to it. Doesn't mean you have to just accept it all. Like everything needs rigor. But I do think we need to adjust a little bit. If this UFO thing is that weird, if it just, to me, it's weird. If it is that weird, then we do need to recalibrate. I will tell you this, man, this is not a new concept. I know a lot of people want like disclosure right now, and I'm so allergic to that term because maybe it's just from being in this field for a while. I don't really know what that means. So, like, what is disclosure? Is it just the government telling you UFOs are real? They've already done that. Like, where does that end? Like, is it the president coming out and showing you a spacecraft and putting it? What's the show me state, Missouri? Putting a UFO in Missouri, right, on display where everybody can take their flamethrowers and torches and, hammers and try to dent this thing. Like, what is disclosure? I don't know what that is for each person. And I do know that even if you're just looking at something scientifically, just because something is weird doesn't mean you can dismiss it. You need to look at it. So yeah, I think we all need to have an open mind, but not let our marbles fall out. Just because one thing is true doesn't make another thing true, and we need to look at it. I don't know if that's helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it is. And let's get to some other questions here. These kind of fall into the, I'm not sure what category to put them in.
Okay.
Metal Matt says, here's right out of left field. Has Jeremy ever seen a ghost, and what does he think of the Sasquatch phenomenon?
Oh, wow. No, I don't. I don't have a lot of knowledge on kind of that thing. Have I ever seen a ghost? That's wild. Not to my knowledge, no. So I've kind of been focused on UFOs. I mean, I find those other realms fascinating. Some people say they intertwine, you know.
Mm.
And if you look at things like Skinwalker Ranch and where there's actual like, you know, scientists claiming to see things come out of portholes, like then that would be that crossover. I'm filled up just with UFOs, hardware, whistleblowers. I'm filled up already. I'm not dismissing it. I just haven't embraced it with my own studies.
Did you see Tom DeLonge's Monsters in California movie?
I did, but I got a bad recall for movies. I remember renting
Okay,
it.
that's fine.
Yeah.
That covers a lot of phenomena all in one film. Even the Bigfoot in a cave comes out at one point.
Oh,
So
really? Okay, I got to
yeah,
rewatch it. Yeah.
yeah. Dub says, would Jeremy agree that UFO UAP commentators are all in different camps? They don't openly disrespect each other, but they have different agendas, different ideas on disclosure. I'm with Jeremy and George on this topic.
Yeah. Are people in different camps? Like, no, we're all working towards the same goal. I think there is in journalism, the old school mentality is there is competition for sure. You know, everybody wants to kind of you know, see how much they can push the boundaries of getting scoops and that kind of thing. Man, I broke enough stories in my life, and I know George Knapp has for sure. At this point, for me, it's about working together. That doesn't mean you got to go on every news show and be like, that other journalist is amazing. Oh wow! Like you know, that's not really your job. Like your job is just to try to uncover this and bring stuff forward and report the news as you know it. So I want to back up from that question and say, I think there's a misunderstanding. I hope there is. I don't think these are separate camps. I think we're all fighting towards a similar goal. Now, of course, some people are more sensitive than others, you know, when it comes to how they're trying to do this. I've had to drop that sensitivity to a high degree because anytime you're reporting on this, you're gonna have slings and arrows coming at you. And I think that's a mistake too, is to feel good by what other people think about you, just as you'd feel bad about the way other people think about you and your reporting. You just got to do what you think is right. We're not in separate camps. That's an illusion. We're all together, whether or not people hug it out or not.
Yeah, I've always said that with the podcast stuff. Anytime listeners come in and if you get a guest on first after a big story, or you know, let's just say Louis Elizondo's book comes out, whether you are the first or 50th interview doesn't really matter because if you're the 50th, you've got 49 other interviews to dig into, get a goldmine of information and follow up on. But you know what? If you're the first, yep, you're the first person to ask the initial questions. The snow is white, there's no footprints, but you can make the most of no matter where you are in these. And I've never felt that either, that there has to be competition. You should just make yourself as kind of good as you can.
Yeah, I do think there's value in sometimes reminding people of the history of interviews. So I do think when you do something and you've worked harder and you get somebody there first, I think it's important to remind people because then they can see that originating information and then how it evolves or devolves. So there is importance in acknowledging the first time that somebody speaks out and what they say and watching how that evolves or devolves based on that. But yeah, man, I love the way you're thinking because when you do your show, you do have the depth of information if you're getting somebody after they've done a bunch of interviews. I think it's a really smart way to look at it.
Yeah. Not that, you know, if someone wants to come on here instead of Joe Rogan first, I wouldn't accept that. That's
Yeah.
absolutely fine. But I imagine they're going on 2 million downloads an episode, Joe Rogan first, you know.
Right, but that it's totally different. Like Joe doesn't necessarily have somebody who's speaking out first on his show, right? Like
Yeah.
he'll wait to see what evolves so that you can have a conversation that is really well rounded. And I think
Yeah.
that's really smart. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Absolutely. Jamie asks, has Jeremy tried remote viewing CE5 or guided meditation? And if so, what's he found the most effective?
Yeah, so I'm not the best candidate for being somebody you should look to for that information because I'm just like not maybe psychically connected to those types of things. I don't know, but I've documented other people doing it for a long time. I actually never put out that footage, but one of my first films that I put together, I haven't put it out because it's still evolving. It was called Looking Up, and it was about this group of people who were friends of mine that were laughing at me because I told them, hey, I'm following this guy. Every time he's whatever, he doesn't have a house or whatever, right? But he would look into the sky and tell me something's coming. And then sure enough, I'm filming and something appears. And I thought it was really weird. So I was trying to document that. I was telling some of my friends about it. They were just laughing at me. I'm like, look, man, I'm following the evidence where it's going. Here's a guy saying he can do it. Here's the thing in the sky. And I'd show him the footage. Again, it's never like a craft, like the most beautiful thing. So I was very skeptical. What was this guy seeing? But I thought that was a story too. But that was back in like 2011. So I kind of followed that along the way. And sure enough, some of my friends who were laughing at it had these really profound experiences. And to this day, they will tell you there is something to this. And it has been very impressive to them. And I have witnessed some of that. There may very well be a very strong connection between human consciousness and what we perceive as UFOs. I am not an authority on it. I'm not even good at it. But there are other people who I think would be better suited to tell you what to do. But from my experience, it was just like asking to see something and being calm. And some of these individuals have documented some pretty wild things in the sky after that.
Cool. Last couple of questions, and then I can let you go, Jeremy. Jeremy. Oh,
Yeah.
Someone's literally called themselves Purple Burglar, knowing full well Scottish people can't say that. So Purple Burglar. What an arsehole. Says the first question is, do you know what those drones over the US actually were?
I do not. What I do know is that you're being lied to straight up from the White House, because, and let me qualify that. A lot of people who were participating in the defense of critical infrastructure, I won't call them sources, I'll call them contacts, right? They're not giving me anything. We're breaking it down for me. There were these communications between the FAA and these defense locations. The FAA had no idea. The FAA had no idea where these were coming from, to the point where they put up restricted flying zones because they did not authorize these flights. So I know you're being lied to by the White House, or somebody gave them bad information and they're repeating it. That's possible too. Don't know. But there were events surrounding these critical infrastructure sites that dealt with absolutely bizarre shaped UAP coming up out of the water on camera, documented on FLIR, and hovering over these bases. You can take that to the bank. And those were not craft like you know them. So I don't know exactly what was going on over the New Jersey skies. And I know for a fact it wasn't just New Jersey skies, and that this is something that's been going on for a long time, and that it is important for us to find out more. But I don't know ground truth on that. I just know you're being lied to.
What stood out to me was it ran over 2 administrations. So people kicked off at Biden for not coming out and doing anything. People are now disappointed Trump has come out with the whitewashing of it. And that just says to me that there is something else, someone else in the background making these calls, making these decisions, giving this information to say, here's what it is. And let's be fair, if they go to Trump and say, this is what it was, what does he do with that? He can't say, well, no, it isn't. So he's going to have to run with that, and his advisors will have to run with that, won't he?
Yeah. I mean, I guess he could dig in more and say, wait a second, that makes zero sense. So I'm not just going to repeat that or have my aide repeat that. I'm going to dig in. You'd hope that's what's happened. I mean, especially because certain presidents have come forward and said they've been lied to about the UFO phenomenon. You would hope that. We didn't see that, but maybe that story isn't over yet, though. I don't know. I would hope they would dig in, because it's absolutely nonsensical and bullshit.
And a second question from that listener, I'm not saying the name again. At what point would we need to be at for you to consider dropping hard disclosure? And I think you'll know what they're getting at there. Basically, everything you know. Complete stagnation from the government, World War III, what would it be?
Right. So it's making an assumption, right? That question's making an assumption that I have somehow, with George, obtained anything that would cause that reaction, right? To be, that's hard disclosure. case closed. That's just not true. It's not true. I'm still vetting information. If you watched the show that I put out, I sit on a lot of information, but not idly, because I have found over time some of it that has come our way that we've been exposed to was incorrect information. Some of it was fabricated. Some of it was good, but it also puts individuals who have informed us in awkward positions that are not worth, breaching that trust. Sometimes people just show us, tell us, supply us information with the express understanding this is for our knowledge and to help us move forward and ask better questions.
Sure.
So I don't think I'm in the position that people think I'm in, that if I dropped everything I have, that it would really do what they're thinking or allegedly have, right? What I've been exposed to or have access to. If I was able to somehow magically put all of that out all at once, would it really be a benefit to this conversation, or would it be a distraction? I hope that by the time George and I ever put anything out, that we have done our due diligence to the point where we are 100% rock solid. And we've tried every time to do that, hit or miss. That's our attempt moving forward. Will you see more from us in our reporting? I certainly hope so. But people also have to understand there are traps that are set for journalists these days. And you can have really good information, but the intent of getting that to you is so that you can be controlled or stopped later. That's just true. That's a briar patch.
One of the big ones for me on that sort of question, and I know it's common for people to ask that or want to know what big UFO journalists know, was when Ross Coulthart mentioned about the a UFO so big they built a building over it. And he said it doesn't matter if I give you the location, because one, it's a working building and people go there for employment, etc. But let's say a journalist like yourself did come out and say, I know where a UFO is, literally a building's built over it. If we all went there, what are you going to do? It's not as if it's literally a box over a craft. It's likely underground and has multiple layers over the top of it. It could be a factory building, Teslas, or if you're a Tesla fan, you've got the Cybertruck. It could be a factory like that, but none of the folks there even know what's underneath, so you don't know. You can't just go digging. And I think people have this idea that there are journalists, or even would it matter if Lou Elizondo spilled everything he knew on the news tonight live? Would that cause disclosure? Probably not. Still,
No. It's
that
a great
just seems to be
great
where we're at.
example. That's a great example. When you've worked in this field long enough and you have spoken directly, and you probably know this from your work, Andy, like you talk directly with people, even off record, you hear all of these things. You hear them for years. You start to shape your understanding, right, based on the reliability of the sources. But what is that going to do? I think he's right. I think Ross is right in saying that. Like, what is that going to do? Is that going to help anybody? Maybe if you give that information to groups like Arrow, if they were working in good faith, that would have been a good thing. I know for sure they're aware of that location. Like, I know who they talked with. I know that they would have been told that information. I can go find out if they were told that information. So that would be a beneficial use if we're all trying to uncover this, is putting that in through proper realms, telling everybody on planet Earth where one of these alleged craft are that's so big you can't even get to it. I agree. I don't think that's going to do anything except cause chaos. But that's not up to me. If I was reporting on that, then it would be up to me. But I'm not reporting on that.
Yeah. I learned early on that even when someone does tell you something off record, like you say, you don't know if it's true, if it's second, third, fourth hand information, and you can only end up looking silly. So,
well, not even looking silly. Like, you could go on a wrong track for a long amount of time. So anytime somebody's told me these prophetic UFO things, I'm like, cool. Where'd you see that? Where'd you hear that? I dug in. And there just wasn't meat on the bone in the way people were portraying it. So I'm like, well, let's back up a second here. So yeah, everybody's got to do that on their own.
And the final question from Caden, I think it's a nice one to end on. He says, Jeremy, things seem to have gotten very serious and complicated with the way the UFO conversation is advancing with Congress and our officials. It seems like certain individuals are setting themselves up to benefit all while further concealing the truth. With all of this shady behaviour and obfuscation, what is it that keeps you going, and what do you still find most rewarding about your job?
Well, that's a very cool question. I do agree that there's a lot of positioning. You know, my joke is all the king's horses, all the king's men are shaping the UAP narrative again. And I do see that. I have to report that to you. I do see that. Is it a big problem? I don't know. But what motivates me is the same thing I think that has always motivated me about this. I find this topic fascinating. Whatever the core truth is, even if it's small, even if it's easily explained with very basic building blocks, the idea of what UFOs represent to human beings, it inspires me. I love working with George on these cases. I love talking to whistleblowers who have something to tell to me, even if I can't report on it. I love obtaining and sometimes being able to release some of the information that comes my way, which is a very small percentage. I think it's like the hunt, man. It's the hunt. I'm hungry for ground truth on the UFO thing. And even after all this time, you know, I don't have the answers, but I got better questions. And I think with better questions, we're more dangerous, you know, to the truth, to the status quo. So that is what motivates me to this day, is that I have fun doing this, and I like learning, and I like coming to better questions. That is the truth. That is why I love this.
Awesome. And I think that comes across in your relationship with George as well when you do Weaponized. I know you don't always get together on a regular basis because you're both taken away and then converge again, but I've enjoyed that show. It helps a lot and puts things in context and provides a lot of extra information. So I appreciate that, and I know a lot of listeners out there do as well. And I just want to ask Jeremy to finish off, what are you working on at the moment, and when will we maybe next see the kind of fruits of your labour, shall we say?
Yeah, I think George and I are dedicated to doing the best episodes of Weaponized we can to break whatever news that we have. I think you'll see, hopefully, you'll be seeing people coming forward to speak for themselves, bringing clarity to some of what you saw in 2024. Hopefully with Immaculate Constellation, I think that is an important story for the UFO world to really grasp the contents of that information. But again, people need to speak for themselves. I do hope that we'll get to the point in our vetting process that more footage can come forward publicly that we deem important, that we feel is important. So that's a process, a legal process as well. Like, I need to legally check everything as I go. Yeah, man, just fighting, more of the same, just fighting.
Before the summer?
I'm never going to make a prediction, dude.
Okay.
Just never going to do it. Life is so complicated, so messy. We're so messy, you know?
But we do know it will be high noon. So we'll leave it there, Jeremy. It'll be 12 noon. We know that.
Oh, high noon? Always.
Yeah. Always high noon. Always high noon.
Yeah. It's just a great time.
That is all for this episode. Thank you very much for tuning in. Don't forget to leave the podcast a review on your chosen platform. Apple and Spotify do make a huge difference to the algorithm. If you're checking the show out on YouTube, please don't forget to like and leave a comment on here as well. Any sharing you do is very much appreciated on any social media platform. And finally, you can listen to shows ad-free and sponsor-free in their glorious full versions by subscribing for less than the price of a coffee on Apple, Spotify, just search That UFO Podcast Premium. YouTube, you can sign up and be a member, or you can do that through patreon.com. Thank you very much for listening, folks.
It wasn't a tic-tac and not quite a saucer, more like a hubcap designed by Chaucer, a little baroque and quite steampunk, like Alice was playing bass for the Parliament of Folk. The little fucker hovered right outside of my window, and when I shoved out the screen, he made it an issue. I don't think he expected me to see his ass, but I'd had some champagne